Hello and welcome back. Still in my patio. So today we're going to be looking at the Supreme Court itself and talk specifically about that entity and what it does for you and me. So the Supreme Court hears all cases in Washington, D.C. Now that kind of seems obvious. Why would the Supreme Court hear cases not in Washington, D.C.? But the Supreme Court, first of all, has not always had its own building. For quite a while, the Supreme Court actually met and made decisions in the basement of the Capitol building. Could you imagine that? And also, at some points in our nation's history, the Supreme Court members did something called riding the circuit. And basically, they would go from place to place hearing cases, which is kind of weird to think about. It includes 9 justices. So we have 8 associate justices and 1 chief justice. And the current Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court is John Roberts, okay? So the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, they have, due to the nature of them being the Supreme Court, they have both original and appellate jurisdiction. So think about what those two terms were. Original jurisdiction is something the Supreme Court has anytime the United States is involved in a case with a foreign government, okay? So anytime the Supreme Court or anytime the United States would be like in a disagreement with Mexico or with Canada that was involving our court system. And that doesn't happen very often. But if that should ever arise, the Supreme Court would take that case. Okay. Also, cases in which the state is a party. Okay. So for an example, let's say that California and Arizona were arguing over the control of a body of water. Okay. The Supreme Court would step in and would hear that case. Now, why wouldn't the state of California or the state of Arizona hear that case? Well, they're probably going to be biased towards their state. So that's where the Supreme Court steps in and can hear those cases. They have appellate jurisdiction, so they can hear the case the second time or subsequent time it's presented. Anytime a case is appealed from a lower court, so anytime it starts at like the district court, goes to the appellate court, and moves its way up to the Supreme Court, they can also hear cases on appeal from the highest state courts. So if there's ever a federal law that's involved, for example, if I think a specific federal law violates my freedom of speech, the Supreme Court could eventually hear that case, okay? An example that we looked at last semester was the case of Hazelwood v. Kuhlmeyer, right? The Hazelwood newspaper, the Hazelwood school newspaper, had those 2 articles in it. This principal said, no, we can't have those in there. They yanked them out. They went ahead and published the paper without those articles. And then that case eventually wound up in the Supreme Court. However, it started in lower courts, okay? They also have the power of judicial review. It's time for a wrap. Marbury v. Madison, what did it do? It established the principle of judicial review. Judicial review? What is that? The court's power to say what is whack. Walk away. Yes, so they do have judicial review, so they can hear cases to declare acts of Congress or the president unconstitutional. So some other stuff you need to know about the Supreme Court. Like I said, there are 9 justices. That number is set by Congress, and it can be changed, but it would take an act of Congress to change it. Similar to like the number of representatives. That number is set at 435, but Congress can change that if they want to. Now, FDR the Great did attempt to pack the court during his second, what's the word I'm looking for? Term of office. Thank you. And he attempted to add 6 Supreme Court justices. Okay. Now, the reason for that was that he was attempting to increase the influence that he and his administration have on the Supreme Court. Because who gets to appoint new federal court justices? The president. Okay. So if there were all of a sudden 6 openings on the Supreme Court, the president would be able to appoint those vacancies. Okay. It didn't happen, but he tried. So the salary of Supreme Court justices, they are around $213,000 a year. That's for one of the 8 associate justices. The Chief Justice gets $223,500 a year. Not a bad chunk of change. They can be removed from office through impeachment, just like any other member of the federal court system. And the term of office, once you're in the federal court system, as long as you're in there on good behavior, then, basically you're not impeached or removed, then you're in there for life. Okay. So some additional duties of the justices, basically they're not defined in the Constitution. So nowhere in the Constitution does it say the Supreme Court can only do this or has to do this also. Their main responsibility, though, of course, is to make decisions on cases. And throughout world history, members of our Supreme Court have served additional roles. For example, during the Warren Commission, so right after JFK was assassinated. Mommy's making a video, just a minute. Right after JFK was assassinated, one of our federal court judges, the Supreme Court, or the Chief Justice actually, was assigned to kind of like lead that investigation. And then also the Nuremberg trial, so dealing with Nazi war crimes. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, let me know.